there is a persistent idea, widely canvassed in a sensational genre of literature, that the Nazis were principally inspired and directed by occult agencies from 1920 to 1945. These works were typically sensational and under-researched. Complete ignorance of sources was common to most authors, and inaccuracies and wild claims were repeated by each newcomer to the genre until abundant literature existed based on wholly spurious facts. These words from the 1985 book, The Occult Roots of Nazism, see historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark throwing a bit of cold water on the persistently popular notion that Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party were inspired or even controlled by demonic forces, and spent much of their time pursuing supernatural relics and experimenting with the dark arts. These ideas have been around since the world first learned of the Nazis' real-life horrors in the 40s, but really started to flourish in the 60s and 70s, with the publication of books like 1960's The Morning of the Magicians and 1972's The Spear of Destiny, both offering allegedly true occult-tinged looks at history. Soon, stories of Nazis and their dealings with otherworldly forces became a cottage industry, with numerous pulp novels, comic books, and movies dedicated to the subject. It's Goodrick Clark's assertion, however, that the majority of this belief can be chalked up to a scared populace, many still living in the shadow of old Christian and even pagan beliefs, looking for supernatural rationale because it's too hard to grapple with the notion that humanity alone could be responsible for such evil. Still, Goodrick Clark does acknowledge the general idea of a tie between Nazism and the occult does perhaps have some factual basis, primarily in the links between certain tenets of Nazi ideology and orosophy, an esoteric ideological belief system popularized in Austria between 1890 and 1930. The term orosophy, which translates to the wisdom of the Aryans, was coined by Lanz von Liebenfels, an Austrian monk who, in 1894, claimed to have become enlightened after finding the tombstone of a Knight Templar, and subsequently began preaching his supposedly Bible-proven belief that only blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans were truly God's men, and that the lower races should be forcibly sterilized. His beliefs led to him being ejected from the Catholic Cistercian order of monks he belonged to, but didn't stop him from becoming a popular author and magazine publisher in Austria, spreading his views through written works and public speaking in the early 1900s. It's easy to see why some might theorize Hitler was inspired by the man, even if there is little evidence to suggest this is a fact, and even less evidence to suggest Hitler was at all entranced by the same sort of occult fascinations as Liebenfels. But a lack of actual evidence about Nazis engaging with the occult hasn't stopped pop culture from dedicating a lot of time to it. Even today, networks like the History Channel still program multiple documentaries about the subject. And Nazi forces working to harness supernatural power are still an easy go-to villain for storytellers working in the realm of the fantastic, as seen in movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Overlord, video games like Wolfenstein, and in a wildly successful comic book universe created by writer-artist Mike Mignola in the early 90s. When Mignola decided to turn a simple sketch he'd composed of a good guy demon into a regular, recurring character, it wasn't too tough to decide to tie the character's origins into the occult-based experimentations of the Nazi Party. In Mignola's story, the Nazis summon an infant devil to Earth, hoping to use him to bring on the apocalypse. Their plans are thwarted, however, when the child is intercepted by the Allied forces and, despite his demonic heritage, he's raised as a force for good by the kind-hearted Professor Trevin Brutenholm. Regularly breaking off and sanding down his forehead horns, so as to look slightly less demonic, Hellboy, as he is dubbed, grows up to become an agent for the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, or BRPD, where he and a colorful cast of superpowered supporting characters have been protecting humanity across numerous comic titles, video games, animated movies, and yes, feature films since 1993. After acclaimed filmmaker Guillermo del Toro saw his plans for his own Hellboy trilogy dashed after the underperformance of his second film in the series, it was only a matter of time before another attempt would be made to bring Red, as his friends call him, to the big screen. And when you're trying to relaunch a beloved comic property as a movie series, maybe it's a good idea to recruit an actress who is a geek icon to play the villain. It seems a marriage made in heaven, or perhaps for this property, hell. A popular actress, a popular character, a new leading man straight off the success of a mega popular sci-fi Netflix series. What could possibly go wrong? The year is 2019, and Lionsgate and Summit Entertainment are ready to reboot the cinematic franchise of a beloved comic property with Hellboy. Yes, the sound of another failed franchise launch means it's time for another episode of Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris, and welcome to part 3 of Milla Jovovich, dedicated to one of our favorite leading ladies, Milla Jovovich.
That's right, and this is a special episode all around. You know, it took us a while. We did an entire month dedicated to King Arthur. And yet, on this episode, we finally get our first appearance of a real Merlin.
Can I say something off the top? First of all, we're talking about Hellboy 2019, as you know from the podcast title and whatnot. I don't have any history with Hellboy, so we will get to that. You can't even comprehend my shock when it starts talking about King Arthur. And we had just done Arthurian April. So I was quite happy. And I subscribe a little bit to the simulation theory. And I don't want to get into it. I've already said too much. But it was nice for this to happen.
Not only that the movie starts by talking about it, but that it's actually a pretty big plot element as well.
Yeah.
So, as Chris just said, we are looking at Hellboy 2019. I guess that's what people always refer to it as from now on, in the rare instances where this movie ever gets talked about again after this podcast. But of course, this is a reboot, essentially, of the Hellboy cinematic franchise, an adaptation of a comic character that's been around for a pretty long time. This is kind of the matter where I forgot how long Hellboy's been running as a comic. And Chris, not to dive further into your little Matrix thing, and this is the kind of thing that I think is just pure coincidence, but you'll probably jerk off about. But
I'm already unzipping.
So your and I's friendship began at San Diego Comic-Con, and did you know that Hellboy's first appearance was in San Diego Comic-Con Comics #2 in August of 1993?
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm not full mast here, but you know what? I can work with this.
I saw that and I thought whatever, but Chris will probably go crazy. But no, this was a character that Mignola had actually drawn for the first time. Mike Mignola, who is Hellboy's creator and primary writer, and for a long time the artist. He created this character in 1991, just kind of doodling, I think, and he did a promotional drawing for the the Great Salt Lake Comic-Con, and he just did this little drawing of this character, and he just wrote the words Hellboy on it because it's this. And if you ever track this drawing down, you can find it pretty easily online. It definitely looks like a rough draft version of the Hellboy we came to know and love. But then he started expanding the character's mythology into a series of short stories that were starting to be published in different. This of course comes from Dark Horse Comics, and Dark Horse had a series called Dark Horse Presents. That would be a series of short stories. And he started telling Hellboy short stories in there, started to get some legs, and then Hellboy started having his own titles published in, let's see here, I have it in front of me, 1994. I didn't realize it was that I've been reading Hellboy for that long. But
wow.
But yes, this is a character that's been around since the mid-90s, and, quickly grew in popularity in the comic world, enough that he got his first movie adaptation in 2004, directed by the great Guillermo del Toro, and starring Ron Perlman as Hellboy. I guess before we talk about that, maybe we should just say what the basic idea of Hellboy is. Chris, do you want to just give a couple 2-sentence maybe description of this character? I know you don't read the comics, but it's pretty clear from the movies and everything.
Yeah, he's a supernatural being brought to Earth through some Nazi rituals, and he's hellbent, pun unintended, on destroying the Earth. But I guess a Bureau of Paranormal Society has taken him and now using him for good. So it's all about kind of nature nurture. Is he going to become the Hellspawn and destroy the world, or is he going to use his strength and his powers for good? So that kind of covers it, eh?
Yeah. What happens if a devil is raised by one of the most good-hearted humans imaginable?
Totally.
What does that create? And as we said, it creates a hero with conflicted, inner turmoil. Mm-hmm. So we get to the 2004 Hellboy. Let's talk a little bit about the history of this series, just because I think it obviously feeds into the movie we're talking about today.
Well, I remember, just to not to step on your toes or anything, but
no.
For the listeners, I want to remind or tell them that about a week ago, I had texted Trev and was like, you know what, I'm really in the mood of revisiting Hellboy 1 and 2. Hellboy 1, actually, I have only seen once. I used to work at the movie theater in Canada here, Cineplex Odeon. and it was one of my first jobs. And they used to have staff screenings. So before the movie's released, they would maybe hold a little staff screening for people at like 12:30 at night, kind of thing. When everybody's gone home, we closed up the doors and we can watch Hellboy first, or movies first. But Hellboy was one of the ones that I saw back in 2004, and I remember this was kind of my introduction into Del Toro as well. So Del Toro, for present day Chris, is one of his favorite filmmakers of all time. Mm-hmm. But in 2004, he was a brand new voice for Chris. But 2004's Hellboy, I thought was all right at the time that I saw it. Mm-hmm. So 4 years later, Hellboy 2 comes out. I saw that movie multiple times in theaters. It was one of the first Blu-rays I ever bought. And I was a gigantic fan. And again, at that point, I had watched a lot more Del Toro stuff. I had watched The Devil's Backbone and his older Spanish films. And by that point, one of my favorite all-time top 10 movies, Pan's Labyrinth, had been released. So I was all in on Del Toro at this point. So with going into this episode, I was like, Trev, we should really revisit him. Like, let's do it. So on our own time, we did end up getting to the first and second Hellboy prior to this recording. So we're really fresh at this point. I've had a week of Hellboy.
I was really glad that, because I was not going to do that. And you inspired me when you said you were thinking of it, and I jumped on that bandwagon. And yeah, it had been a long time for me too. Especially number 2. Like, I actually feel like I've seen number 1 more than number 2, even though I prefer number 2. But it's just that, I don't know why that shaked out, but it definitely, number 2 felt more fresh to me this time.
Sure.
But yeah, same kind of story. I mean, I knew, boy, when Hellboy came out, what's weird is I knew who Del Toro was, but he was probably like the mimic guy, you know?
Right.
And like I'm not sure if I'd seen The Devil's Backbone already. I know I was aware of it because I'm sure I'd heard like there's this great, Mexican ghost story you have to see, but I'm not sure if I'd seen it or not. I can't remember, but I know Hellboy was very early for me on Del Toro as well. And I kind of had the same reaction, except mine was a little more heavily dependent on the fact that I did read the comic book. And I will say that the Del Toro film, the first one, it's an okay adaptation of the comic book, but it never really felt like what I thought a Hellboy movie should feel like. Now, like pretty much everyone else in the universe, I'll say that Ron Perlman is Hellboy. That was just the perfect casting choice, and he's really what makes that movie work, largely. But the movie just had this certain kind of tone and look that wasn't how I kind of always thought that movie would be. So I guess I'll just quickly explain that. The comic book has humor, but never as much humor as I'd say any of these movies have. It's definitely quite a bit more horror-driven, but also not to the point of being very, very explicit R-rated horror, just kind of gothic, unnerving horror with a little bit of humor mixed in, I would say. And also just Mike Mignola's art style has this very particular look to it that I think is actually really tough to translate to cinema. And so whenever directors come on and try to figure out how to do Hellboy, chances are what they create on screen is not going to look like what you might think it's going to look like. And in my head, I think I use this comparison a lot because I always say this is what I felt like the Daredevil movie should have looked like too, and it didn't. But The Crow by Alex Proyas, that movie, that has the visual look that I thought a Hellboy film should have. Just like very dark darks, lots of shadow. And that's not really what Del Toro did. So that kind of stuff kept me a little bit at arm's length from it, but I thought it was okay. And I remember being pretty surprised that it even got a sequel because it wasn't like a gigantic hit. But you mentioned Pan's Labyrinth, and the important thing is that plops right in the middle of these two films.
Yeah.
And that got Del Toro the clout to do the second one. I mean, that second one even came out, was distributed by a different studio than the first one. So this is definitely a matter of suddenly him just having the freedom to pursue a project he wanted, a different studio coming in saying, oh, okay, we'll take a shot on it. And, it should be said, neither of the Del Toro movies were big hits, but they both did really, really well on DVD and Blu-ray, and were kind of really made the majority of their money in that format. At the time of the second one coming out, I think it was pretty much widely accepted that the second one was an improvement. You already mentioned that. I will agree. I think the second one is awesome. Yeah. And again, the second one is even less like the comic books, but you kind of don't care because it's just clear that Del Toro, coming off of Pan's Labyrinth, is just so much more confident, and he's just leaning fully into making a Del Toro movie now.
Yep.
He's saying, okay, this is Del Toro's Hellboy. And I know at the time that created a little bit of a rift between Del Toro and Mike Mignola. Now, Chris, I don't know how much you know about this or how much you've heard about it. I will say I've always thought that this rift is not as big as some people make it out to be. I think it's always been slightly exaggerated by some people in the press, and in particular the fans. I don't think these two guys have ever hated each other. I think they're still friends. I don't think this ever came to like them, being angry or anything. But I do know that Mignola kind of like publicly stated that Hellboy 2 is kind of getting further away from his vision of Hellboy. And I think it really is the thing of just, this is a character he created. He'd been the architect of the comic series for a long time. And it was hard for him to see any other creator put so much of their creative stamp on it. And I understand that. And I think it's just, that's bound to happen. I do think, though, that he was cool enough to at least acknowledge, well, okay, then that's just not my Hellboy. That's Guillermo's Hellboy now. But I think there was always just a little bit of, sadness on his part, maybe to see it moving away from that.
You know what's fascinating to me, and I haven't really thought about it until you just mentioned it, but I've always known, because now I'm a diehard Del Toro fan, that Hellboy means so much to him. And it's interesting that 2006's Pan's Labyrinth, wins best at the time foreign film at the Oscars, and now he gains the clout. And they ask, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And what does he choose? A sequel to Hellboy. That to me is incredible. It really, really cements how much this character means to Guillermo del Toro, / meant. And probably continues because I'm sure we're going to talk about what was supposed to happen after the second movie. But it's pretty incredible for basically, you get that blank check moment of, that Chris Nolan moment of, he makes The Dark Knight and then he goes to make Inception. This is almost if Chris Nolan was like, I'm going to make Memento 2. And it's just very interesting to go back to the well, so to speak. But it paid off.
I think it's even crazier that because it's not just it's not like I'm making Memento 2, because it's actually, what's your blank check movie? I want to do a sequel to an adaptation of someone's work. Again,
totally.
Not even something he created, right?
Yeah.
Just a character he fell in love with reading the comics and then wanted to keep playing in that world. And I was just thinking yesterday when watching Hellboy 2, I was actually thinking about that term blank check, Chris, because man, what a blank check movie. That's when they go down into like the troll city and everything, and you're just like, man, this is just a guy who's just being allowed to do whatever he wants.
Oh yeah, I in my Letterboxd review, I use that with quotation fingers, but it's just kind of like a little diary of what I watch, and I've always felt it's probably Del Toro's most self-indulgent film. Even more so than Shape of Water. Like this movie, as much as I think Shape of Water is like the movie that Del Toro was put on this earth to make, Hellboy 2 feels like he gives into all of his impulses for better or for worse, and that's why I love that movie so much.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm just looking at Del Toro's filmography, and I just had a brain fart because I was saying when Hellboy came out, I'm not sure what I'd seen. Of course, I knew him as the Blade 2 guy.
Yeah.
And Blade 2 is another example of him just taking a sequel and just. I don't want to say blowing the first one out of the water, but just like, making a
making
much more
it his
grand. Yeah, exactly. Taking his and putting his signature stamp on it in a way that he couldn't do in the first one with Hellboy and never had the chance to do with the first Blade since he didn't make it.
100%.
But yeah, Hellboy 2 rocked. And to what you were just saying about Del Toro, I mean, in the second one, he definitely sets up a third chapter, and he at that point was now talking about it as a trilogy. And I don't know. So this is why I wanted to bring up the thing about Mignola and Del Toro, because I've seen a lot of people say that Mignola is the one who prevented the third Del Toro movie from happening, and I don't think that's true. I think Mignola was completely fine with this trilogy going on, for whatever his thoughts might have been about how it's kind of moving further away from his comics. I don't think Mignola was stupid enough to not see how much more exposure this was giving his creation, how much it was probably helping his bank account. And I think, like I said, I think him and Del Toro were still getting along well enough, and I think Mignola even probably would have been somewhat creatively involved in the third one. Really what kind of changed this was Del Toro, at this point, was being looked at to direct the Hobbit films. So there was a period where he was talking about how maybe I'll make the third Hellboy after I get done with Middle-earth. Of course, we all know that didn't go anywhere, as is the case with many Del Toro projects. But I think there's actually some other factors. One of them was, I think, Ron Perlman didn't seem super jazzed about doing a third one. Do you remember this, Chris, at the time?
I don't remember him being not into it. This is news to me. I always thought by his own words, he seems like he was on a campaign to get the third one made. Yeah,
it's strange because with Perlman, I feel like that comes and goes. I feel like there was a period
like selective memory.
Yeah, I think there was a period shortly after Hellboy 2, where he was talking more about how, much of a pain it is to put that makeup on and how he was getting really old to play the part. And then I think it's that kind of thing where, this is the Daniel Craig as Bond thing again, right? When you've just made it, you might feel a little frustrated. And when it already doesn't seem like it's going to happen, maybe you start to defensively say you don't want it to happen. Right. But then I think the further away he got from it, and the more and more it seemed like it wasn't going to happen, then I think he started to be like, well, no, wait, I really do want to go back and finish that. Mm-hmm. And he's also said that he suddenly got rejuvenated to want to do it when he went to work on Pacific Rim with Del Toro and saw how well Del Toro was being treated by Legendary. And so there was thoughts at the time that maybe Legendary could help shepherd the third Hellboy. And Perlman was very excited about the fact that maybe him and Del Toro could finally have the complete creative freedom that they always wanted on the third one. So he's kind of gone back and forth on that. So that was part of it. Obviously, as I said, neither of the first two were gigantic financial successes. So studios were always kind of hesitant about doing a third one, especially as the physical media market started to die out. Because like I said, those movies did much better in physical media. But once that started to go away, you couldn't guarantee that they'd be a theatrical hit. And that the third film would have had to be the highest budgeted one because of what he had set up. I mean, the third one's going to be very big. Perlman's talked about this, how the third one would have to be a gigantic, epic story. Del Toro has apparently told him the story. He's said it's huge.
I mean, one doesn't, begin to let one's mind wander about what the third film should look like when one is in the hands of somebody like Guillermo del Toro. Guillermo always conceived of this as a trilogy, and everything that happens in the first two films will be resolved in the third one, because there won't be any others. And the things that needed to be resolved were epic in proportion. It was like Hellboy is the beast of the apocalypse. He's summoned to Earth with an oracle, which is non-negotiable, which is that he will be the seed of destruction of all mankind. The second movie ends with her being pregnant with twins. There's what sets up this final resolve. Hellboy has been raised to do good, but born to do evil. So he's constantly has this Nietzschean philosophical dialectic going on inside of him about nature versus nurture. Which one of those things will prevail, and what does he have to give up in order for the good one to prevail? That's what the third film was meant to be, which is why I felt like it was criminal that we didn't finish the trilogy, because everything that you guys had invested yourself in the first two films was all about how that comes to a close. And that's why I personally mounted the kind of campaign I did to get the third film made, but just too many moving parts and too many people with schedules and stuff, so it didn't happen.
I think you guys all would have wanted to see that. I know I would have.
So yeah, just a lot of things kind of unfortunately got in the way of that. And to this day, that's still, man, does that bug me that we never got that third Del Toro.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate travesty that they never got to finish the trilogy. And not on their own, sorry. No, I was just going to say not on their own terms. Like that's right. That's how it feels. Like if Del Toro was like, I mean, I did have these ideas and I write them in his notebook, and he talks about it to Perlman, and he's like, whatever. But no, he's pretty outspoken, being like, nah, this was kind of ripped away from me in one form or another.
Yeah. And the one time where maybe Mignola is a little bit to blame, or people can get a little bit upset with him, is when it started to become clear that the third film was not going to happen, at least not from Del Toro. Apparently, Del Toro did ask Mike Mignola if maybe they could tell the story of the third film in a comic series, and Mike Mignola shot that down and would not let it happen.
Yeah,
because Mignola felt, he definitely wanted to have complete control over what was done with Hellboy in the comics. And he didn't want a Hellboy comic that wasn't in his continuity out there confusing people. I don't know. I think that's a little silly, maybe, but again, I'm not gonna like poo-poo him for his decisions as the creator.
I mean, I will a little bit. That's pretty stupid. Just make it a one-off book. Put a hardcover on it, and it's like it's kind of like I mean, Joss Whedon got to do his Buffy season 8 and 9, I think, right? For Buffy, but I know he was the creator. But I mean, comics are already so fucking baffling when it comes to their chronology and timelines and character interpretations, and like how many different Batmans we have even in the comic book world, and now that's translating to the film world. I mean, I'm sure it would have been awesome. I just want to know. I just want to. I just want to see it. You know what I mean? And Del Toro would draw. He'd have some his art in there. Now I'm mad.
I mean, I somewhat agree with you, but at the same time, I think what you just said is maybe what Mignola's concern was, is that I think there's probably a level of pride there that Hellboy is a character that, as I said, since 1994 has maintained one singular continuity. He's still working on it. He's still the primary author.
Right.
And that's the thing is, like, if he can kind of avoid that trap of multiple continuities, other people working on Hellboy titles, I'm sure that's a big level of why he was kind of nervous about that. But I was always hoping they would maybe do it as an animated film, which also that never materialized. So
may I ask, because again you're familiar with the comics, Hellboy, you just saying it's kept a chronological, pace or whatever.
Consistency.
Consistency, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. That's the same as we had mentioned, and you told me about Judge Dredd as well, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah, but I mean, like slightly different in that Judge Dredd there's like consistently been a Judge Dredd story told in comic form, like pretty much every month since its creation, right? Hellboy is not like that, right? Hellboy kind of comes and goes in terms of miniseries, various spin-offs and stuff. So yes, like it's true in that there's a continuity that's been maintained, but I would say there's certainly way more Judge Dredd content than there is Hellboy. But Hellboy as a universe still exists, and obviously there's been spin-off titles and books. The BRPD, the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, got their own title. Lobster Johnson and Abe Sapiens, the supporting characters have gotten their own spin-off titles. It's a full universe now. Hellboy is not the only character that exists in this universe. So I'm sure that's definitely a level of pride for Mignola, and he should be proud of it. It's a creator-owned, unique, singular vision that's maintained for a long time. So it's perhaps not surprising that even though the Del Toro movie kind of stalled out and wasn't going somewhere, Mignola and others, I'm sure, wanted to see this continue as a cinematic franchise. So, Chris, maybe now is a good time. It doesn't usually take us this long, but maybe you should just tell us some stats on Hellboy 2019.
Sure. Yes, it is directed by Neil Marshall, most famous for the movie The Descent. What year was that? 2004 as well? I think it was.
I believe it was. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I'm really good with years. Written by Andrew Cosby, and it's based on obviously the Dark Horse comic book by Mike Mignola. The budget for this film is $50 million domestically. It made $21.9 million, and worldwide, get ready, Trev. Worldwide, this film made $55 million.
Yeah. And there ain't no DVDs or Blu-rays saving this one.
No, unfortunately.
Also, Chris, I just looked it up. The Descent was 2005. So, but you know what? That means he was filming in 2004. I'll still give it to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So at a certain point in the development of this project, because I remember hearing rumblings of a third Hellboy for a long time, and it seemed like, as we just said, there definitely came a point where, Del Toro even tweeted out at some point where he just said, "Look, I have to tell everyone, Hellboy 3 is not going to happen." Mm-hmm. They tried very hard. I remember a period where Del Toro was really trying to muster up a lot of fan interest online through tweets and stuff, and telling people to like kind of, I don't know if he was asking for anything as like gauche as a letter writing campaign, but he was really trying to get people to kind of pressure the idea so they could make it. And I remember and I think this is where some of the anger at Mignola comes again. I don't remember the specifics of this are hazy to me, but I remember there coming a point where Del Toro said something like, yeah, pretty soon me, Ron, and Mike are going to sit down and talk about the third one, and we're going to come to a decision finally. And so wish me luck. This is like the closest we're getting to it maybe happening. And then it kind of seemed like he came out of that dinner and said like, the third one's not happening. And everyone took it as like, Mignola, who wasn't happy with the second one, has probably shot this down now. And again, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. But whatever the case, the rumblings of a third Hellboy film continued. But at a certain point, it started to shift over into the direction of, is this going to be a sequel without Del Toro's involvement? Is it going to be a reboot? And it was getting kind of confusing. We knew Ron Perlman wasn't coming back. And then because Perlman wouldn't come back without Del Toro. And then eventually we started to get more and more news about how this is going to be a full reboot.
Yeah, in May of 2017, Mignola actually announced it on his Facebook page. It's going to be a reboot, and at the time, it was titled Hellboy: Rise of the Blood Queen, and it was definitely going to be at that moment in 2017, and it was going to be directed by Neil Marshall and then starred David Harbour as Hellboy. David Harbour was making waves from Stranger Things, so
Sheriff Hooper.
Sheriff Hooper.
And at this time, like, again, Mignola was kind of doing some press where he said something like that, again, I think rankled some Del Toro fans when he mentioned that this Hellboy would be more faithful to the comic series. Oh boy, well, I'll talk about that. But but you know, that was the kind of thing where people were like, wow, he's really, it felt like maybe he was trying to like take this away from Del Toro a little bit and put his stamp back on it. But it should be said that even early in this process, you know, Mignola was involved, but I think he was only as involved as he ever was with the Del Toro ones. And he's even since said that he was he was a co-executive producer, and he didn't really participate too much in like the pre-production or design. I have a quote from here where he says, "When the decision was made to do another movie, I got involved, basically saying, if you're going to do that story, don't do this or that, change this and that. I helped to steer it. Christopher Gold and I did write a couple drafts of the screenplay and got it back on track, and then the decision was made to do a reboot." So it actually sounds like when he was first involved, maybe he was thinking of it as a third film in the continuity, and then they decided to do a reboot, and maybe his involvement kind of lessened, actually.
Right.
But this is another one that seems like it had multiple writers and, boy, a lot of stuff going on that we're going to talk about as we talk about the film.
Definitely.
And what is your thought on? Oh, did you have something?
No. Go ahead.
I don't know if you had a thought on this going into the movie when you initially saw it, but what's your thought on following Del Toro and going into a reboot with Neil Marshall? What do you think of him as like that choice of director? Because he was in an interesting place in his filmography this time too, in that he had not directed a feature in a pretty long time. He'd become just a TV guy. Yeah,
almost 10 years actually. And like I said, he was most notable to me, and I think the horror community for The Descent from 2005. Haha.
Which I'm just going to say right now, Chris, and you know me, I'm Trev, Mr. Horror over here. I've long said, and I'm going to say it again, I'm putting it on the record, The Descent, the best horror film of the 2000s.
And honestly,
of the aughts, that decade, right?
Yeah,
it's been better since 2010, but 2000 to 2010, The Descent.
Dude, The Descent is so good. I actually have a distinct memory of watching that with some friends when it had come out. I think we had rented it, and we went to a friend's house, and then we watched it just like in the basement. So a little funny story about going to my friend's house to watch it. Her and her boyfriend lived in the basement of some couple's house. And so me and my buddies are like walking up, there's probably like 6 of us that are, walking up to hang out. And then all of a sudden we like peek through the window of the main floor. And then this guy is just railing this girl. Like they're just going at it. And it was actually the first time and last time that I've seen people in real life fornicating. So The Descent has a special place in my heart and my loins. So there's that.
Well, that is not why I like The Descent, but no, definitely a fantastic film, I'll also give some love to Dog Soldiers, Neil Marshall's debut film. A flawed but very fun werewolf versus the military movie, and actually the film he made after The Descent, Doomsday, which I did not like when I first saw. In recent years, I've revisited and I've kind of come around on that one a little bit too. I don't know if you are familiar with that one, Chris, or
I have seen that one. I watched it one time because I was into that not Kate Beckinsale.
Yeah,
girl?
Rona Mitra.
Yeah. It was like that movie came out after Underworld 3.
I believe so. Yeah.
Right, and that's why I watched it. It was on my PVR or whatever, and I checked or VOD at the time, and I thought it was like whatever. It was kind of like a Mad Max kind of ripoff.
Well, exactly.
Right?
And that's, I think at the time I was just like, wow, this stupid Mad Max ripoff. And that was like me being dumb considering I grew up watching so many Mad Max ripoffs and enjoying them. And I think I just had a chip on my shoulder for that one for some reason. But yeah, in recent years I've visited and I kind of got more into like, oh, this is Neil Marshall just making a purposely stupid, over the top B-movie Mad Max ripoff. And yeah, I enjoyed it more. And then I also saw his 2010 historical war film, as Wikipedia would say, Centurion. Which I was not so hot on. That was, we've talked before about that kind of wave to try and make, gladiator-esque movies, and Centurion was still part of that. And yeah, that was his last one for a while, but very successful in the world of TV, including probably his biggest accolade was directing some of the best episodes of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, and most notably Blackwater, the season 2 finale, question mark, with the ship and it explodes.
Yeah, it got to a point where it seemed like whenever they were going to do like a very big action episode, Neil Marshall was the guy they brought in. In fact, did Neil Marshall direct the pilot of Game of Thrones? Am I remember that right? Or?
He did not, no.
Okay, he didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
But certainly some of the bigger episodes. So, sorry, that was like a long tangent to allow you now to answer that initial question. What do you think of choosing him to direct Hellboy?
That's what we do on this show. We like to go back and forth, and I like it. But choosing him, I was looking forward to it because it was like, it was kind of a return to form, kind of coming back into the world of horror because that's what they were marketing this movie on, and just coming back to like in the director's chair. So I was excited for it, for a different take. Right away, you knew it was going to be totally different than Del Toro's because again, nobody shoots a movie like Guillermo del Toro. Nobody designs monsters like Guillermo del Toro. I don't need to hammer this home, but you just know when he makes a movie. So I was okay with it just not being him. If he wasn't going to do it, then whatever. This happens all the time. So I wasn't.
Well, I think the key there is if it was not going to be him, it had to be a reboot. I don't think.
Yes.
Anybody picking up that continuity, that would have been a nightmare.
That would have been disaster on many levels. And especially if you recasted Ron Perlman but kept the continuity, even that would be just insane. But so I was on board for it. I didn't like stick my nose up with it. And actually, something I will get into when we start talking about the film. This is my second viewing of the movie. I never saw it in theaters. I wasn't so jazzed to go to the theater to see it, but I did catch it when it was released on Blu-ray. And I definitely think that there was people out for blood for the film in general. Yeah. But we'll get to that. I don't want to bury the lead a little bit, but yeah.
Because I'll say this was my first viewing of it, and I mentioned to you before that I was going to talk about why I didn't see it originally. And that's, in the build-up to this film, I was trying to keep an open mind about it. Now, I knew, as you said, there was definitely, there was just a certain segment of the fans who were never going to be happy with it as long as it wasn't Del Toro and Ron Perlman. And, Ron Perlman was kind of, I don't know. Again, he was kind of public out there saying, not helping this movie's cause by saying he wished he got to do his instead and that he could play Hellboy again. I know they kind of orchestrated like a dinner that him and David Harbour went to, and eventually Ron Perlman gave his blessing. But I don't feel like he was being super supportive in the press about this project.
My fans would kill me if I didn't ask you your thoughts on, obviously they're doing the new Hellboy that's coming out in January. Did you get a chance to, did you have any consulting at all? Does anybody ask you any advice? I'm just curious.
Yeah, my wife asked me, hey, what do you hey, schmuck, put down the chicken leg. We don't talk. Anyway.
But David Harbour, who's playing the role now, I don't know if he
has not called.
He has not reached out. Okay, that's going on.
Do you hope that he calls?
Huh?
Do you hope that he calls? Would you take that call?
No?
I mean, I'd take the call. I hear he's terrific. We actually had dinner together. That was kind of like a little bit publicized. But my dear friend Patton Oswalt is, I guess, friends with David and also my neighbor in the neighborhood I live in, L.A. So we've developed this beautiful relationship where we run into each other in coffee shops and bookstores and grocery stores and stuff. And out of the blue, I get a thing from Patton saying he'd like to put a dinner together with the new Hellboy and the old Hellboy.
That's cool.
As a kind of a peace thing and a kind of a passing of the torch. And so I said, I love Patton. I had heard good things about David. I had a couple of actual exchanges with David on social media. He's also politically outspoken, and we did it, and it was a really cool evening. But look, man, it's like I did 2 Hellboy movies. I invested a huge amount in playing the character. I spent a long time really poking and prodding the bear to get the third one made, and I fell short.
Did the rug get pulled out onto you guys about that one? Did you think it was going through, and then it just, or it was never really kind of set in stone?
I never thought it was going through, but I did know that Guillermo had an amazing idea of how to close the trilogy. So if you ask me about it, it's kind of still an open wound.
Yeah.
And I prefer not to really. I wish everybody well, but I prefer to kind of leave it be.
And then, but I was still trying to keep an open mind, and I have nothing against David Harbour. I've only seen the first season of Stranger Things, but I quite liked him in that, and I thought he was an interesting choice. I think it's kind of cool whenever someone who's not a very big star is given a lead role in something like this. Some of the early trailers didn't do much for me, but I knew it had Milla in it, so I was like, I felt this constant push and pull of like, should I care about this? Should I be interested? What? And I think really what killed me, my interest in it, was that kind of 1-2 punch of the Rotten Tomatoes score, which was a dreadful 9% or something. And granted, that's not the end all be all for me, but Chris, as you know, right before it came out, the weekend before it came out, this big report was published online about what a huge mess the behind the scenes was of this film. Mm-hmm. And there was all this talk already about how David Harbour didn't get along with Neil Marshall. Neil Marshall didn't get along with the producers. The producers were firing members of the crew. There was so much creative conflict, and everything sounded like a recipe for disaster. And then the word of mouth, all that together, I just never bothered. And then also I think at that point I was like, you know what? Someday I'll probably host a franchise-based show with some weird Canadian guy. I'll get to this later. So I just decided to wait.
We're all the more happy for it.
Yep. So yeah, that's the case. This is a movie that came out and definitely flopped. Definitely had, as you said, there were certainly people that were just out for blood. There was, talk of it being a mess, and it all resulted in a big wet fart of a box office bomb. But does that mean it's a bad movie? Well, we'll talk about that on the other side of this.
Great transition, by the way.
Wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, God, I take that back.
He warned us that something was coming.
If there is ever an end in this forever war, it will be because of you and your strong right hand.
I'm on your side! Sorry, my bad.
We're the line in the sand. We fight against the forces of darkness.
This is it. We're expecting a sign that says secret headquarters.
Oi. I need some ID, love.
Are you serious? You made me a damn weapon. I just wanted to help you become the best you.
Some dads get their kids Legos.
Haven't we got to be saving the world or something?
Does it do anything special?
Yeah. It smashes things real good. You are mankind's best and only hope.
I thought we were supposed to be fighting monsters, not working with them.
Who you calling monster, pal? You look in the mirror recently?
He's an asshole.
Sorry! I interrupt!
On the contrary, you've arrived just in time.
Hellboy, a supernatural being brought to Earth through a mystical Nazi ritual in 1944, now works side by side with his adoptive father and leader of the top secret Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense. Against the backdrop of a dreadful threat by the defeated evil and eternal Blood Queen, a double-crossed Hellboy, alongside psychic agent Alice Monaghan and the battle-scarred operative Major Ben Daimo, embark on a dangerous quest to thwart the witch's dark plans to end the world.
Yep. Hellboy, 2019.
Okay, so like I said, I've seen this already, so I'm really more curious on your end, and especially with your history of the comics. Also, one thing I will say for the listeners, we had just discussed this in the in-between, but we're definitely going to be comparing a lot to the original first two films. And sometimes I do hate that, and I've said this on the podcast before. I do hate comparing things, but this is really unavoidable. So apologies in advance that there's a lot of pros and cons that we will talk about the film in comparison to Del Toro's two movies.
Yeah, well, not only is it unavoidable, I think you just have to talk about it because, first of all, comparison is part of the reason this movie failed, And I also think it's just, to me, watching it today, this very much felt like a lot of the movie was a response and reaction to the Del Toro film, and in particular, trying to not be the Del Toro series. So I think it's more than fair to compare the two.
Sure.
So, how do I feel about it? Well, let me just start by saying I didn't like it. Now, did I hate it as much as I expected to, given what I talked about, like the Rotten Tomatoes score and all the stuff I had heard? No, I wouldn't say necessarily. I don't know that I would consider this a complete unwatchable disaster. I think there's some slight fun to be had if you can let your mind get in the right kind of mood. But I do think this feels, as you watch it, like a movie that... what am I looking for here? This doesn't feel like a director's vision. It feels like a movie that was really kind of destroyed in the process of making it. And I do think it just ultimately, like, mess is the best way to describe this movie. And there's quite a bit about it that really aggravates me. As I said, I don't think any of the three Hellboy movies are actually quite like the comic books. But for this one in particular, right, where you had Mignola saying it was going to be more faithful, and where you had them kind of, trying to, like, what's the best way to maybe not be the Del Toro movies? Well, let's go back to the comic source material. This one is even so far further removed from the comics that I was like, what are you doing? And I'll talk about those elements as we discuss more specifics, because they kind of got by in saying, and it's true, they take a lot more story elements from the comics, but they do other stuff where I was just like, what? And so, yeah, ultimately, this did not do much for me. We were just saying how sad we are that there will never be a third Del Toro Hellboy. I'm not going to shed any tears for there not being a second David Harbour Hellboy.
So my original viewing of this movie, I felt my reaction was a reaction to the negative reaction. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So like at the time when I first watched it, I remember even texting you after watching it being like, that was fine. Yeah. Like it wasn't the trite, complete fucking nuclear disaster that the internet made me believe it was. So I thought it was like fine when I watched it. I was like, oh, okay, there's just a Hellboy movie and now it's over. And it was a movie I watched one time, Going into this one, I was definitely put my failure to franchise goggles on to really, take some extensive notes. And I came to the hypothesis that this movie is in complete conflict with itself.
Yes.
It is a
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is a cacophonous mess of a film that is it's unpleasant to watch, to listen to even try to be entertained by it. As you said, there is fun to be had. There is some stuff. I actually think David Harbour is pretty solid. He's just playing a different Hellboy. Is that bad? I'm not sure. It's just different than Ron Perlman. Ron Perlman had a natural charisma and charm to playing Hellboy, while this version is he's kind of like a petulant. He's kind of like a complainer a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But in general, I just thought this movie was just, again, in conflict with itself. Definitely an editing botch job. Scenes just happen because they need to happen, rather than giving me a meaningful reason to want them to happen. We'll get into specifics there. But I felt this movie was unpleasant to watch. And also, I wrote this down. This is the Deadpoolification of movies.
Yep.
And this... Sorry?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Deadpool, the original, Ryan Reynolds movie came out in 2016, and it hit the right... How do I want to explain? I think it hit this... was it 2016, by the way? Am I right about that?
God, cut this, so I sound like I know. Yes.
Excellent. I'm a genius, and Trev had to check, and he had no idea. Okay. And he told me to cut this, and I'm not going to. But
right. Well, you didn't know either, so
okay. So Deadpool came out, and it hit this in the perfect feeling that I think the audience wanted. The audience wanted an R-rated movie. They wanted an R-rated comic book hero to watch. I think people were getting tired of the PG-13 stuff. So Deadpool struck this like nerve that everybody really, really wanted. Whatever about your feelings on the film, it was a success. Now, the issue with what Deadpool did to movies, and I'm seeing it, we just saw it with Mortal Kombat in 2021, but I think when you get an R-rated version of a character, sometimes you don't need to be that R-rated. You're being R-rated for the sake of it. Almost like you got, I got a blank check of ratings. Oh, let's just add fuck anywhere for
Chris,
no reason at all.
I know both you and I take notes while we watch the movie, and I will tell you, my very first note happened roughly, 10 seconds in, because this movie starts with a voiceover by Ian McShane, where he says something like, "It was called the Dark Ages, and for fucking good reason," and I just wrote, "Oh no."
Yeah.
Like I was like, "Oh no, it's gonna be that kind of movie," and it is, because like you said, you and I we just had recently watched Mortal Kombat, and we talked about how they just throw the F-bomb in whenever they can. This movie does the same thing. And as I mentioned earlier, Hellboy is a supernatural horror comic, but it's never felt to me like it needs an R rating, and it certainly doesn't need this kind of R rating. And that was aggravating me because I just remember the filmmakers being so like, yeah, we're making like the badass R-rated Hellboy. This ain't your Del Toro Hellboy. This one's going to have blood and guts and swearing. It's just like, okay, but why? And whenever it happens in this movie, I was going to say this, but I'll say it now because it just made me laugh. And there's certain sequences that I think specifically speak to this. I was kind of perusing Letterboxd today, and I saw a one-sentence review for this version, and I loved this review. All they wrote was, "What if a tribal tattoo made a Hellboy movie?" and that is what this feels like. This is a movie that's trying so hard to be badass that it ends up just being silly and not in a good way. You're just like, you're groaning at it.
Yeah, it's not it's not your grandfather's Hellboy, and as a grandfather of yourself, I need to. that was a new one. They don't swear in the comics.
No, not to like this extreme for sure. And it's just like the Hellboy comics are not like this. I don't think they're this. I mean, it's gory, of course. It's a comic book, right? But it's not like this kind of petulant, juvenile maturity that you see in this movie. That's what I mean. Like you said, these are just characters who are swearing because they think makes them sound funny or cool. But yeah, the comic book is not an F-bomb fest. It's not treated like this. And the character of Hellboy. So I guess I'll just jump into this right now. You mentioned that you think David Harbour's okay. I mean, I guess. Look. I don't envy this guy for having to follow Ron Perlman. Like this was a tough gig for sure. You know. Mm-hmm. And he's not done any favors by a makeup job that I think is extremely ugly and like not pleasant to look at. I mean, again, we weren't doing ourselves any favor by watching the Del Toro movies right before this, I suppose. But that makeup on Perlman is just so good, and it makes him look like approachable, you know, and like scary but approachable, scary but charming. And this makeup job is just ugly. It looks like unfinished and like haphazard. The glove looks cheap, like his red right hand. You know when you watch like bad cheap movies and someone gets their hand cut off and then they get like some apparatus put in, but it just makes their arm look like it's an extra foot long, and you can tell it's like, and that's what it like the red right hand looks like in this. It just like looks stupid and cheap and bad. But in terms of like just his performance, I really did not like how, and you alluded to this, I didn't like how his version of Hellboy was just like this oaf, right? He's just a dick the entire movie. And a big part of what makes those first two movies work is that it's the contrast of Hellboy as a character, that he is this demon who is sent to destroy us all, but because he was raised by this very kind-hearted man, he's become this, yes, he can be sarcastic, yes, he drinks a lot and stuff, but he has a charm, and you can believe that you could be friends with him. And I think this Hellboy is just super off-putting, and yeah, I think that's partly Harbour. It's obviously a lot of it's the writing too, but I was like not into him in this.
That's a really good point, especially with the approachable. I didn't even think of it that way, But Ron Perlman's Hellboy is kind of like your buddy. And there's even like that amazing scene in Golden Army, where him and Abe Sapien just get drunk.
One of the greatest scenes of all time.
Yes, absolutely. And they just sing a song together, and he's bitching about Liz, his love interest, and talking about women and relationships, and it's just like two bros, having a drink together. And yes, they're in fish makeup and devil horns, but you buy it. This one, now I'm getting like PTSD flashbacks of watching the movie again, but it's like, yeah, he's just always yelling. He was like yelling like a lot. It doesn't help that the characters around him, and maybe this is a good time to say this, they have two characters. What's their names? I said it in the plot.
Alice Monaghan is the psychic young woman.
Yes,
and then
played
the
by
M11 Sasha Lane. Played by
Sasha Lane.
And then Daniel Day Kim, and we have to talk about this too, the Daniel Day Kim element. But Daniel Day Kim plays the M11 agent Ben Diamo. I'm probably saying that a little wrong, but who spoiler alert, we find out is a shapeshifter.
Yes, but those two characters aren't doing Hellboy any favors because they're both so blah, and they're really just a couple of wet blankets. Yep. So David Harbour almost seems like he needs to be bigger because they're bringing nothing to the table, and it's just like a harsh contrast. Like it's a really harsh. He's being a dick, and these two are just like nothing burgers.
Well, I think it's the problem there too. Is like that they're. I don't want to say they're unlikable, but you're right in that they don't have enough personality to like bring much out of it, and they have no heart. And that's ultimately the problem with this film is that the Del Toro movies have heart and soul, and this one does not. This one is so obsessed with being cool and badass that it forgets the soul. And Hellboy's a big jerk. I think this translates over to Ian McShane too. Now, look, I love Ian McShane. I'm usually pretty happy to see him, but there is like such a difference between how John Hurt plays Trevor Brutenholm, the leader of the BRPD who raised Hellboy from a little baby and is the reason Hellboy became a good person. John Hurt plays that character with so much warmth and just so much likability and soul. And then Ian McShane, from that very first voiceover, right? He's just this like gruff, sarcastic asshole.
Yeah.
And I know they're just playing him for laughs, but that hurts the movie. And the thing is, everything in this movie is played for laughs. Hellboy does nothing but crack sarcastic jokes. And if he doesn't take anything seriously, then you as the audience don't feel like you have to take anything seriously. None of the monsters or villains are treated seriously. Everything is just one big joke. And yeah, that's why this doesn't work, and that's why you need the deft touch of someone like Del Toro, who's always understood the soul and humanity of monsters.
You also even just touched on something about something needs to be meaningful, and I have to talk about the violence. We'll talk about it a lot, but I have to talk about this one specific part of violence. And you know me and my rules, okay? So we're gonna talk about rules. We should. I mean, one day maybe I will throw a little theme song like Chris's Rule Corner, or I have no idea. Chris's Rule Breaker. We got a lot of rule breakers in the house tonight. I'll figure something out. Del Toro's film Hellboy 2. Hellboy gets stabbed in his heart, or close to his heart. The blade is moving towards it, but he gets stabbed one time. Trev. It becomes a plot point. It becomes a race against time. It becomes oh my God, we need to save him or he's going to die. He needs to sacrifice something Liz, his romantic interest, needs to sacrifice something to get him back. So it becomes really, really meaningful. Now, in this film, there's a scene where I guess this is taken from one of the comic book arcs or something. Do you know what that was? The Wild Hunt or something?
Yes, this movie is pulling sequences and ideas from like 3 of the major Hellboy comics.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's like a group of old school like Arthurian knights, whatever. We'll get back to that. And they lead Hellboy out to go kill these giants for them. So Hellboy's going to help, and then he's going to kill the giants. Well, out of an inexplicable reason, and for no reason, like nothing, dude, it just fucking happened. They all turn on him, and I think they stab him through the heart, through his back, and then continue to stab him and puncture him and shoot arrows into him. He probably gets eviscerated with like 20 different blades.
And then electrocuted, don't forget.
I forgot. And in water. In water, he gets electrocuted. Dude just gets up and he's fine.
Yeah, about 2 minutes later, he is up and fighting 3 giants and beating their asses.
Oh yeah, and also the giants are beating his ass. He's getting knocked around like crazy. So okay, the movie wants me to be like, oh, they're gonna kill him, and then I realize, 20 fucking stab wounds, especially right through the heart, do nothing. Oh, he's invincible. That's my thought. Oh, Hellboy's invincible. And then when he's fighting anything else for the entire rest of the film, I'm sitting here being like, why do I give a shit? He's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. And that is such an issue with movies like this. When you have supernatural films, comic book films, fantasy stuff, anything like that, you need to hammer down what the rules of this universe are. And as soon as you break those rules, it's fucking game over. It's game over.
Yeah, when you treat all your characters like CGI pinballs, which is what this movie does in all the action sequences, there is no reason to care. And also beyond that, it just looks like garbage. That scene with him fighting the giants. I mean, this is a movie that is just full of like, you know, when we did Ultraviolet 2 episodes ago, we talked about there was actually a sequence in that they admitted they released like unfinished and unrendered, fully rendered, and this movie just is like full of moments like that.
Yeah.
And you know, I have this like, I don't think I've ever talked about this on the show before, Chris, but especially when viewing like adaptations of something, I have this rule in my head, which I don't really call it like anything, but if I did, it would be like the embarrassment test or something, where to kind of, for me to figure out if a movie is good and if it's doing a good job of like adequately adapting something or making something, you know, cool for the big screen, I'll ask myself this question. What if I was showing this movie to someone who does not know anything about this character or who just didn't care about this movie, but I told them like, dude, trust me, this Hellboy movie is going to be awesome, right? And if I was showing it to them, is there any point in the movie where I would be embarrassed that I got them to watch this? Where I would feel like, oh no, they're going to think I'm an idiot. And that my embarrassment test sensors were going off like crazy during the scene with him fighting the giants because it just looked so cheap, so pathetic. And as you said, there was like no like logic to any of it. And that's where in my head I was like, oh, this is the point where if I had brought someone in the theater to be like, dude, you got to see this Hellboy movie, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I have no excuse for this. And the movie has like so many sequences like that. That's the first one, but there's plenty more to follow.
That's funny you say that's your test, because that has actually happened to me with two of my best friends. Years ago, there was a little movie called Dead Snow that came out. Mm-hmm. And I saw it at a film festival with a bunch of rowdy horror fans at like midnight, right?
Yeah.
And as you know, and as many of our listeners probably know, those screenings can get fucking wild, okay? Mm-hmm. And it can tear down the fucking, you know, it's just fun as shit. So then this movie gets, you know, released on Blu-ray. I buy it immediately because I'm like, oh man, I had the fucking best time of my life watching this. And I invited my two friends over to watch it. And there was a noticeable, it was just us three guys watching it. No drinking either. We were watching it like for real. And not really talking over it either. We were just kind of watching it. And I was overcome with that awkward look around at your friends. Why aren't they laughing? Why aren't they having a good time? And then apparently they were making eyes at each other as well. Like, Chris is a fucking idiot. and I think I remember the moment. I think it's one of the one characters goes into like an outhouse and he has like diarrhea or something. And then he's having sex with somebody. I can't remember. But I remember them both looking at me at the end of the movie, and I'm staring at them being like, and they're just like, fucking, we hate you. Yeah. And it's like a running gag in our friendship that's the movie that made them really reconsider anything that I recommended.
Yeah, well, yeah, your strategic mistake on that was going with the first Dead Snow, because you're right, that's a bad movie. But Dead Snow 2, I will say, is actually pretty awesome. Okay. Now, my version of this that I always go back to in my head is the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes. Now, the lead up to this movie, I worked with someone at the time who was like, "You're excited for this movie called Planet of the Apes?" And I was like, "You don't understand. It's Tim Burton. This guy has not missed. I mean, you're talking about the Batman, Beetlejuice, Pee-wee." I was like, also, the Planet of the Apes series, the original series, is awesome. look at the makeup jobs in these trailers. You know, I think Mark Wahlberg is like a fairly decent leading man. Like, just trust me on this. It's gonna be awesome. And thankfully, I did not see the movie with that friend, but I remember that friend coming into work the next week, going to see it off of my recommendation, and just being like, "You asshole!" And I had seen it too, and I had no defense. It's like, I know, I thought it'd be good. What can I say? You know, yeah. So I'm always very aware of that. And you know, you mentioned earlier the Deadpool thing, and I wanted to get back to that for just a second, because that was like such a great point that this is the Deadpoolification of movies, and there's some other examples I want to talk about with that, and this that is just clearly trying to cash in on that Deadpool vibe. But here's the problem with them even taking that approach. The reason it worked with Deadpool was because Deadpool is a superhero film, right? And what's more, a superhero film already like set in a universe that already existed. It's set in the X-Men cinematic universe. People were ready for a movie to come along and take the piss out of superhero films. At that point, we've been sitting through about 10 years of them, right? They become the dominant, genre in blockbuster filmmaking. We needed some kind of release, some kind of movie to point out the absurdity of them. That's fine for Deadpool, which is set in that universe. The reason you don't do that with Hellboy is because Hellboy as a property, as a character, is already so dissimilar from all other comic book and superhero properties. It's its own thing. You don't need to you know what I'm saying? You don't need that to be mocking anything else or trying to be anything different. You just need to make a Hellboy movie. Yeah. And that will be different enough. And I feel like they missed the memo on that. And the other Hellboy thing, so I mentioned, the other Deadpool thing in this Hellboy that was just grating on me throughout the film. And Chris, I can't imagine you didn't notice it. I mentioned earlier how nothing is taken seriously. And at some point, it's pretty clear. And again, maybe this speaks back to what we'll talk about with the conflicts between Neil Marshall and producers. And you talking about how this is a movie in conflict with itself. Certainly, some people wanted this to be a horror movie. Many more people, and clearly the ones who got the final say, wanted it to be a comedy. Mm-hmm. And they keep defaulting to the jokes, and where they don't have a joke, they clearly just ADR them in. Yep. And this movie is full of ADR off-screen jokes, and it was just killing me. I have a couple examples, and they always come at like super inappropriate moments. So like right after that scene where Hellboy gets betrayed and stabbed and electrocuted, and then he fights the giants, he's like, he's losing consciousness again. He's all beat up, and a car pulls up, and we hear Hellboy go, "Is that my Uber?" No, why would he say that at this point, right? And then another one that just it was the ADR was so bad on this one. Is there a scene where Hellboy is in a cave with Merlin, which I guess we'll have to explain that a little bit later. Merlin and the two supporting characters we're talking about. Alice Monaghan has been kind of stabbed and overtaken with this like kind of creature, and Merlin is able to get the creature off of her, and he throws it aside, and it's kind of starts slithering away. And they have Daniel Day Kim, his voice just come in and go, "Should we be worried about where that's going?" But it's like so clearly ADR, and it's just like, oh God. And the movie's just like full of crap like that.
ADR is such a issue with honestly a lot of the movies that we talk about on this show. I understand the reason for ADR. I understand they want to punch up the script or they do this or that. But when it becomes overboard, and I'm right there with you. I wrote that down as well. Not the specific examples, but the amount of ADR drops it's on another level. And speaking of things that are just dropped in, Trev, what about the needle drops?
This is okay. Again, when I say that, like, there's a certain tone that I, in my head, picture a Hellboy movie. And like maybe Del Toro never quite got there, but at least he did not score the movie to like a bunch of like aggro cock rock, right? Which and it's just like what is it? Yeah, it's oh man, the needle drops suck. And like, and Hellboy shouldn't have needle drops. Like it's unnecessary.
No, but it happens because Deadpool has needle drops. It happens because you throw, X Gon Give It To You by DMX, R.I.P. One Love. It doesn't work in this situation. We mentioned the Giants fight when he goes to fight the three giants. All of a sudden, this rock song plays. Like, why isn't this filled with score? The score sucks. We're not going to have a score horror moment today, but the score sucks. But at least put something other than needle drop. I don't know. I can't. It's hard to really pinpoint exactly my feelings on it because think of it this way: in the epilogue action scene, it plays over "Kickstart My Heart." What? again, as a person who knows the comics quite well, would you ever, when you were reading those as a child, were you ever thinking, man, we got to get some Motley Crue in here?
No. Yeah, and you know what? If Del Toro can resist using Kickstart My Heart in Hellboy 2 after he gets stabbed in the heart, has to come back from it, then this movie should have done the same.
Yeah,
well, at least there it would have been thematically appropriate, you know?
Yeah, in this case, it's just a mess. It just adds to that unpleasant nature that I was saying. Like, I just feel like everything is grating.
Mm-hmm.
It's grating to the viewer. Like you're into watching at least some of the gore, or maybe, I have to say, some of the creature effects are quite good. I like the CGI practical blend with some of the monsters. There's like a pig monster, like kind of like a minotaur type of thing. I don't know his name. His face is obviously CGI'd in his head, but his body's still practical, and it worked for me. I like that. And then also
there's one fantastic design in this. I don't know if I know I cut you off. Maybe this is the one you're about to say.
The Baba Yaga.
Baba Yaga, yeah. Baba Yaga, and not only that, but we mentioned earlier how there are some slight charms to be had. The Baba Yaga sequence is this movie at its best.
Yes.
That whole scene where Hellboy goes into a parallel dimension, where it turns out he has previously banished the witch Baba Yaga. And he's pulled into this dimension and ends up having like a conversation with her in this world she's been banished into. In this kind of house she lives in on legs now. That looks awesome. She looks awesome. She's actually very scary looking.
Very disgusting. Like really
very
gross
disgusting.
looking.
The way she moves is very creepy. And that whole sequence, now, of course, they still can't resist popping in a couple ADR bad jokes. But for the most part, that sequence is like the best part of this movie by far. And that sequence is like, man, why couldn't the whole movie be this? You know, then you'd have something. Because that sequence even feels the most Del Toro-ish. I could see Del Toro looking at that sequence and being like, yeah, giving them props for that.
I guess that person who played the Baba Yaga, all the physicality, did a lot of stuff in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Is that the movie?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Probably is the being who like puts itself together, and yeah.
Correct. And then that was a Del Toro Presents movie as well. So we have a little connection. But it's that's the best character in the movie, is the Baba Yaga, for sure.
Yeah. And I know we're jumping all over the place, but to go back to what we were saying earlier about like and you saying it's unpleasant, there's no heart, and the characterization, right? This is probably a good time to talk about like the characters a little bit, and I can use that as a transition because, one thing that always happens when you reboot a property is you want to make sure that you're doing something a little different than the previous continuity, right? So clearly when they decided to make this one, they're like, well, we can't use Liz Sherman and Abe Sapien, the two primary Hellboy sidekicks. So we need to dig a little deeper into the comics and pick new characters. And, Alice Monaghan and Ben Daimo certainly come from the comics. But this is the kind of thing you do, right? This is the reason why I think I've used this comparison before. This is the reason why Batman Begins has Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul, right? Because they hadn't been used yet in the movies.
Yeah.
So you make sure you use what you haven't seen before. But there's something about those characters where Hellboy, as you said, has no connection to them. And I wanted to, again, I know it's unfair, but to bring up the Del Toro thing. You brought up the scene with him and Abe Sapien just hanging out and like getting drunk and how like humanizing that is. Think about the relationship between Hellboy and Jeffrey Tambor's character in the Del Toro movies, and how well drawn that is, right? To the point where, Jeffrey Tambor is kind of like the government stooge put in charge of the BRPD, meant to like keep Hellboy's existence a secret, meant to keep the BRPD a secret. Him and Hellboy don't get along. Through the course of the first film, they're forced to work together at a certain point. And, the movie ends with them. Their relationship has evolved a little bit. You don't get the sense they're friends, but I love that moment where Jeffrey Tambor shows Hellboy the proper way to light a cigar.
Yeah.
And you kind of see just a little bit of bonding. And then the thing is, Del Toro is smart enough to, when the second movie starts, I bet you most directors would just have them be like buddies now. And Del Toro's like, no, that's not what would happen, right? They're still kind of on outs, but you can tell they respect each other a little bit. Like Jeffrey Tambor actually like wishes Hellboy liked him more. He's kind of upset by it, And Hellboy is like, we'll listen to him, but not really, right? But I just like that kind of relationship. The kind of thinking Del Toro's put into that relationship is like so clear, right? It has so many layers. In this movie, Hellboy doesn't like Daniel Day Kim's character until he does, and that's it. The script just suddenly goes, now he likes him. And it's like, oh, Del Toro would have built that so naturally, and we would have seen that happen. And in this, it's just like, I don't like you. Well, you're all right now. It's like, oh, okay, I guess that's fine. And with Alice, we never get a good sense of like what their relationship is. We understand he saved her as a little girl, as a baby, but does he like her? Like, is there a romantic element to this, like with Liz? I don't think so. But like, how close are they of friends now because they haven't seen each other in years? Yeah, it's just it's sloppy all the way through.
And that's a good point, because the movie, something I liked about the movie is that it just starts. I do like when movies do that, and it doesn't really focus on the origin. It just kind of starts. I got the sense that Hellboy has a history of missions. He talks about meeting Ra in the underworld, and he's a close talker. And I'm like, I like little moments of that. I know his ugly makeup is there, but he still looks, it's a testament to the iconic design that he looks as good as he does. But like the scarring up on his face and stuff, yes, it's not. I don't want to be buddies with him, but it at least gives a little bit of history. But the problem is when this movie just throws you in, but it doesn't do enough to flesh out those relationships. Just like what you're saying with Alice, it's all really hinted at of what had occurred. It does show you a little bit of a flashback, but it's not really a flashback with her. I wish there was some flashbacks of her or of Hellboy checking up on Alice through the years. Maybe showing it, hey, remember that last time when we yada yada yada, and then it shows it. It's all talk.
Yep.
That's what I'm getting at. The movie's all talk. It throws you into the story, which I appreciate. I'm all for that. But it doesn't do the work for me to emotionally grab onto the things that they're saying.
Now, that said, let me just, I mentioned, so we don't forget this. I do want to make sure we mention the thing about the Ben Daimo character and Daniel Day Kim's involvement, because I think it's something worth talking about, because we're going to, in a moment here, we're going to talk about some less than stellar behind the scenes stuff. Let's talk about one good behind the scene moment, which actually comes from a bad thing originally. But initially in the casting of this film, that part was given to Ed Skrein, or Skrine. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce his name. But people will probably best remember him from playing the first Dario in Game of Thrones, the season 3 Dario, and also playing Ajax and Deadpool, the main villain. So he was cast as Ben Daimo, and when that happened, the fan base online kind of reacted pretty negatively, because they point out, well, wait, that character in the comics is Japanese American. And Ed Skrein, and I had no real opinions of this guy, other than I actually thought the second Dario was better. So I was just like, oh, Ed Skrein, that's the guy who's like the worst Dario. and I didn't really think Ajax was that great of a villain or whatever, and Deadpool. But this guy made me a fan for life with the way he reacted, because he actually removed himself from the movie and put out like a really nice statement saying that, like, oh, I didn't understand. I didn't know this character was Japanese American in the comics. I never would have taken that part. Parts like this should be given to like the right representation. Representation is super important. And I just thought that was super big of him to actually, I don't believe the producers asked him to step down. I think they were just going to try and deal with it. But the fact that he was like, no, this is wrong. I don't want this part. And then took himself out of it, I thought was like really, really cool. And then Daniel Day Kim was cast, and he also spoke out and like really gave Ed Skrein credit for doing that. So I just wanted to bring that up and say that's pretty cool. Did it ultimately matter for the movie? Daniel Day Kim still plays a very boring character and plays it pretty boringly, but whatever. That was something worth mentioning, I thought.
This was Ed Skrein. You see, you're championing Ed Skrein, but really he just got a look at the full script.
Yeah,
and then he was fucking get me out of here.
Yeah, this worked out for him, I guess. Yeah.
But no, good point. Good. I like that we highlighted that. Something good about the production. Because let's talk about the bad. Mm-hmm. There's a lot. Like I've said a couple times now, the movie's in conflict with each other, because it does sound like producers Lawrence Gordon and Lloyd Levin.
Lawrence Gordon, the guy from Saw?
Don't you dare bring up Cary Elwes.
Dr. Lawrence Gordon? Don't you got his foot cut off, and then he went on to produce Hellboy?
Hallie?
I swear I'll be back. One of the best performances in cinema history.
Oh, man. Yeah, him. They did not get along with Neil Marshall, and back and forth. They made it known. Yes, especially so Neil Marshall has a collaborator, cinematographer, that he basically shoots all his movies, and his name is Sam McCurdy. Well, it sounds like that the producers fired him, unbeknownst to Neil Marshall, purely to make a statement of, bro, this ain't your movie. We run the show.
Yep.
That's fucked up. It was absolutely a message. Some more insiders say that Lloyd Levin frequently interrupted Marshall before the cast and crew during rehearsals and gave them directing notes in front of Neil Marshall that were different than what they were told. More insiders state that David Harbour walked off the set multiple times, refusing to film more takes for Neil Marshall. David Harbour and Ian McShane rewrote their lines on the day for a lot of their scenes, which to be fair, that happens a lot in blockbuster filmmaking, but usually it's not really the actors running the show.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, what is the hens are running the hen house, the chickens are running the coop, like whatever that.
This is where, I mean, like, as like bad as this movie is, I can't really come down too harshly on Neil Marshall, because this sounds like a movie that really got away from him.
Yes.
And he has been very open about saying, he even admits he only took this as like an opportunity to get back into feature filmmaking. He'd been pursuing a lot of his own ideas for movies, and nobody was kind of biting because he was kind of getting a reputation now as the TV guy. And I think, he was doing very well on TV, but he wanted to get back to features. So yeah, I have a quote from Neil Marshall here. He says, that appealed to me, and obviously getting to do a feature was a big thing. Despite my reservations or whatever, I jumped at it because it was a chance to do a feature after 9 years. I wanted to get back in the game, but I made an unwise decision because I should have based my choice purely on whether the script was any good. Unfortunately, the script was never any good, and there's only so much a director can do. I've said it a few times before, you can't polish a turd. Even the best director in the world can't make a masterpiece out of a script that was substandard. This was a confused script from the start, combining different stories and sticking rigidly to the comics, which worked fine as graphic novels, but when you translate them to the screen, there are gaping plot holes. Hearing that quote and then thinking about everything you just said about the disagreements between him and the producers and what we mentioned about the tone of the film and all the ADR jokes, my assumption is that Neil Marshall came on board really thinking he was going to make the horror version of Hellboy, which was being promised from the beginning. And everyone else is like, no, we got to make the Deadpool version of Hellboy. And I think that's probably where these problems lay, because that's what it seems like to me, that I bet you Neil Marshall wasn't as eager to yuck it up with the project as much as they were. So I don't know. That's just a guess, but that's where my thoughts lie.
Well, Neil Marshall, this kind of synced up nice for our podcast. Like I always say, we schedule these months in advance, but Neil Marshall has been in the news recently regarding his next film called The Reckoning. And of course, they had to ask him a little bit about Hellboy. So he says, I'd come out of a particularly miserable experience doing Hellboy. On that film, there was no creative control whatsoever. I knew I wanted to get back and do a really good horror film, get back into the horror world and do something where I might not have all the bells and whistles and the big budget or whatever, but I'd regain creative control over the work I was doing. I think it could have been something interesting. The reason that I was invited to do it in the first place was because they said they wanted to make the horror version of Hellboy, and I guess that was the base that lured me in. And then, of course, I was never allowed to do that. So, I don't know, it was one of those things. I know that's biased. I know we're only getting one side of the story, but it really feels. I mean, he has horror credentials. They pimped this fucking movie as the horror R-rated, bloodied up movie. I have a quote from David Harbour about it being like, "This movie is gory. I mean, it's like a horror movie. There's a lot of blood in it. It's brutal." Then Andrew Cosby, the writer of the film, saying it's going to be darker, more gruesome version of Hellboy. It was supposed to be a horror movie.
Yeah.
And this Lawrence Gordon and Levin totally fucked it up. like this goes back to I was really reminiscent of Fantastic from 2015.
Yep.
Of like, you hire a guy to do something interesting. Now, that guy, I'm not a huge fan of. But regardless, he was hired to do a job. Now, the producers got scared and didn't like what they were doing, so they got involved and they totally mucked it up. This feels like the exact same thing that had happened. This is Fantastic all over again.
Yep.
that people were
Or you
hired
hire,
to do a gig.
you hire Lord Miller to do a solo movie.
Absolutely, 1000%. You know what you're hiring. That's what I don't understand about these producers, or honestly any job in general. There's a hiring process. You get a sense of what you're bringing them on board for. Now, you don't want to change it when they're 3 months on the gig. It's a very it's unfortunate, and it's a real symptom of Hollywood hubris. And yeah, again, I don't blame Neil Marshall here. This is one where I think that a director kind of gets away scot-free. I really do feel scot-free. What is it?
Scot-free.
Okay, good, I got it. But it does feel that way, that I do find him innocent in the process.
Yeah, I mean, except I don't know if anyone's like truly innocent, and that they all seem kind of scarred walking away from this.
Sure,
like everybody seems embarrassed of it after the fact. So David Harbour has recently, had to, kind of try and, defend this a little bit, and he's not going out of his way to do so. He has said, talking about this film in retrospect, "We did our best, but there's so many things that go into these things, and they're not always going to work out. I did what I could do, and I feel proud of what I did, but ultimately I'm not in control of a lot of those things." And then he goes on to say, the problem I have with comic book movies nowadays is that I think, and it's a result of the Marvel stuff, it's like chocolate. It's a flavor. So everyone goes, chocolate is delicious, and these guys make the best chocolate. So as you judge the movies, it's like, well, it's not as chocolatey as this. This does not taste like chocolate at all. And I sort of want a world where there's more flavors than just comparisons to chocolate. So in that way, when Hellboy is viewed on the chocolate spectrum, it does very poorly. That said, it also has major problems. Yeah, David. Yeah. Also very funny that he followed this up by going right into a Marvel movie. But I'll tell you one cast member who is actually a little easier on the film, and this is something we obviously need to talk about, Chris, because it's the lady of the hour. Milla Jovovich. We haven't talked much about her yet. We've been saving that. She is the villain in this film. She plays the Blood Queen. A character who had in the film's prologue we learned was a villain of King Arthur. King Arthur and Merlin actually stopped her from taking over the world, cut her body into various pieces, buried them in different boxes all over the world, or I guess probably just all over Europe. And then centuries later, the evil forces in this film find those boxes, assemble her body back together. And she picks up her plans to take over the world, but now she also sees in Hellboy a potential, romantic interest, at least partner, right? She understands that Hellboy was meant to conquer humanity, and so she is trying to convince Hellboy that is indeed his destiny. I just want to summarize her part. She said in retrospect that she still believes this movie will go on to be a cult hit. But let's talk about her for a little bit, Chris. And in particular, what do you think of her as a villain in this? I know you have some thoughts. I will just quickly say, I hate to say this, I think it's like the first time I'm saying this in this Milla Jovovich, I think she's kind of bad in this.
My lifeblood sustains you. But now I must reclaim what is mine. The others will be here soon.
What about Hellboy?
If he comes, I have a little surprise in store.
Yeah, and I said I don't even know. I don't know if she's bad or if she's just in the wrong movie because she's playing this in a tone that no one else is. But
no,
yeah,
I'll tell you the reason why.
Okay,
she does not. I guarantee you, she does not share the screen with David Harbour in the entire filming of this movie. There is no way.
Sure doesn't seem like it. Yeah.
It doesn't seem that way. It feels like they filmed her with her pig friend. That's it for all the movie. And any scene where Harbour's in, it's not him, it's the doubles. Because there's not so in the lead up to this, obviously, I do the editing for the podcast and I find the little, the picture for our podcast, episode. There's one shot where they share the same shot. Like they're in the same frame together in the entire film.
Never have I seen a creature quite like you.
Nimue.
Such power, such glorious potential. There is no reason for us to be enemies when we can be so much more. They fear us. They call us monsters. We yearn for the same day when we are not reviled, but lauded as heroes. Seed by seed, tree by tree, stone by stone, we will replant Eden together. What happens next? Only the fates decide.
and everything else is like a hand. It's like they're hiding the seams of like, was she on set? Was he on set? Who was on set? Oh, it's just a hand on his face, cut back to her. Oh, it's his horn out of focus, in the corner. I would bet maybe my life savings that I don't know if they've met. And like, she looks green screened and CGI'd in. When they meet for the first time on the hilltop by the tree, on the cliff there, she's not there. Like, they're not together. It's obvious. Like, I know I'm not a cinephile by I'm not, but I do know special effects quite well. And I would say that there's no chance in hell that they were together. So I think that leads into it. Another thing I wanted to say before we get off the issue, you absolutely love Milla Jovovich. You would do anything for her. Now, she's cut into bits. Which part are you taking?
Ooh, I thought you were going to ask a different question, because this movie raised... Okay, I'm going to get back to your question, but this movie raised a serious moral quandary to me. Would I be willing to usher in the apocalypse if Milla Jovovich asked me to be her queen and be with her? And I don't know. You know what the sad thing is? I'm going to say no, but the problem is how long it takes me to get to that decision. Because I don't instantly say no. I think about it for a while, I wonder, like, I don't know, how worthy is humanity, really, Like, now, in terms of which body part, there's no way for me to answer this without sounding perverted, so I'm just gonna lean into it and say, you gotta take that head, baby. I mean, it's 100%. Like...
This isn't over. We are destined for one another. We will meet again on the last day of the ending of the world.
Lady, quit while you're ahead.
No!
Yeah. I mean, I love Milla for her smile. Her
Thought you may have
eyes.
taken a shin, but whatever. Okay.
No, I'm not a foot guy as much, so no, I don't need those. I don't need the legs as much as you got. You got the head. At least I can still have some conversations with her. Now, hopefully, she won't be talking in this like weird, bizarre tone she's doing all of her lines in this, because like I said, it's like you said, maybe that's a byproduct of her not being on set with anyone, and maybe she was being directed by the producers and not Neil Marshall. I don't know, but. I don't know. I feel like she's trying to go for this like campy villainous performance, but it's not good. It's not fun. It's not what I would expect from her.
Sometimes a campy villain can succeed in a smarter movie, in a schlockier movie. That's what I would say. Like this.
Even in a movie I don't like. Like, I didn't like Three Musketeers, but she was having fun in that, and she was a fun villain, and she's just not in this. Yeah.
Can I actually? This is actually a good jumping off point of talking about her career a little bit. Can I just take a moment here?
Of course, it's Milla Jovovich.
Ah, yes. I was driving around. I think the day before we recorded the Three Musketeers episode, and I was just starting to think about Milla's career in general, and just kind of in the prep of our recording, and I started to think about our decision to schedule these movies out and in what order to schedule them in. And I really had to think about it. And so the first movie we talked about was Ultraviolet. Mm-hmm. So a reminder, that movie takes place at the peak of Milla's Resident Evil career. When that movie came out, Milla was Alice. 100% was Alice. So they were like, you know what? Let's make her the next big action star in another franchise, because it's obviously working here. Let's do it again.
Yeah, and Ultraviolet, everything about Ultraviolet feels like a star vehicle, right? This is a movie that's like, we are cashing in on this woman and her recent success.
And it bombs horribly, okay? So that happens. Now, the next film we schedule in the docket is Three Musketeers. So we kind of flash forward in her career and her personal life to when she works with her husband again, Paul W.S. Anderson, but on a different type of film, a family film. Because you know what? Now she's a mother, he's a father, and they wanted to make, just kind of a fun, family-friendly romp. Failure. Now we schedule Hellboy out. This is the most recent Milla, I don't even want to say vehicle, because weirdly enough, she is not marketed at all.
No.
And we talked about this in the Three Musketeers episode, and then we talked about it in private, actually, that Milla isn't really a name, but she's a name in geek culture.
Yes.
I have a buddy that when I told him we were doing this 2-month event, I say event like we have more than 3 listeners, and he had said to me, he can't even like picture what Milla Jovovich looks like.
Oh, what a sad existence.
Yeah, 100%. And I was we should give him the head. Anyway, I was struck by that, right? Because I do feel like she's I don't want to say a geek icon, but definitely in that realm. So when Hellboy came out, it does feel like, oh, let's market to the geek crowd. This is a Comic-Con movie. This is one of those types of films. Let's market her. She's nowhere to be found. No. Anywhere. There's no poster. There's nothing. I didn't even, honestly, I saw this movie in 2019, and it didn't even really register with me that she was in it. And she plays a villain, and it's, and again, failure. Now, after this episode, we're going to talk about, to cap off Milla Jovovich, we're actually going to go back to where it all started. And it's going to be about The Fifth Element. And we recently had found out that The Fifth Element was planning to have a sequel, and it just never got made. We'll get into that in that episode, so tune in. But that's where it all started, where she kind of, it was like this spark. Everybody was talking about Lilu, and she overtook the film. And everybody was like, she's going to be the next big thing. And what I think you mentioned in one of the last couple episodes, that wasn't really the case, where her star actually was right there and then nothing happened. And she's just a very interesting career in general that I just don't, I don't know if I really have a thesis here of what to say, but maybe it's just that Milla Jovovich deserves better, and not even the geek properties know how to use her outside of Resident Evil. Mm-hmm. And that's a frustrating thing to me. Like you've said, that's $1 billion franchise, and nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about how much of a star, quote unquote, they have on their hands. So much so that in 2019, a fucking geek comic property doesn't even throw her on the fucking poster.
Yeah, and it's crazy too, because as you said, this movie was originally announced as Hellboy: Rise of the Blood Queen, right?
Yeah.
Before they changed the name. And if they had kept the name, obviously you would have had her be part of the marketing, because you want to be like, this is the Blood Queen that is rising. You'd have to show her off, and then they take that out of the title. She gets pretty much dropped from the marketing, because I agree. Like I certainly knew she was in it, because I'm usually fairly aware of what's going on with her. My surveillance cameras, as long as they're working. But yeah, she's like dropped out of the marketing, and I mean, maybe that's like ultimately good for her, but because she doesn't have to bear the brunt of when these movies fail in as much of a way as some other people do, But it is strange that, as you said, for someone who is clearly a geek icon, and for someone who it would just be like treated as like a megastar somewhere like Comic-Con, right? And I've seen it happen, right? I've been in a Resident Evil panel and seen the way that crowd reacts to her. We're this far into the MCU and like the DCEU, and she hasn't been thrown a role in any of those, and she can't get into some of these like bigger properties. It's really frustrating, because for me, it's like this. It's doubly frustrating because I'm at this point, I'm just accepting that she's going to mostly exist in this realm of like B movie action films, which I still think is too bad, because I think she's actually a better actress than that. I think she's shown it in films like He Got Game and movie like Stone, that she can actually, give better performances than I think she gets credit for. So that's one thing. Like, I wish she could get into some real dramas and really show off her stuff again. But even accepting that, if she's only going to be like this nerd icon, as you just said, can't we get her some better nerd stuff?
Yeah.
Just what's going on here, guys? Come on. Don't make us do 2 more years of Milla Jovovich. Let's get her another franchise or something, or let's get her into a franchise that's already working. Let's have her be like put her in a Bond movie. Put her in something. I don't know.
Put her in one of these Disney Plus fucking Star Wars or Marvel shows. Like,
exactly, yeah.
This has been a missed opportunity for many, many years. And unfortunately, it feels like, by Hollywood standards, the time has come and gone.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good transition for me to get into our regular segment about Milla. But before I do that, Chris, I guess I should just ask, do you have any kind of final thoughts on Hellboy as we wrap up our look at this 2019 reboot of it? I mean, are you bummed it's not going to get a sequel? What would you have liked to seen from a sequel? What do you think? Where are you at with this?
I just think this movie was confused. Does it want to be an epic fantasy horror movie, or does it want to be B-movie schlock? And I think it kind of fails on both sides. Do I want more of these? No. I don't want more of this creative team at all. David Harbour, I know you were a little more harsh on him than I am. I'm not saying he's great, by the way. That's one thing either. I think he's just like fine. He's just different. Do I want to see him continue? Probably, maybe with a better script. Again, just don't have him yelling the whole time. I think there's some promise there that they could work with, but really this interpretation of the character, this Deadpoolification of the source material, didn't really do it for me. I don't like that trend that has been happening. So really, I want Hellboy 3 by Del Toro, and that's really it. And other than that, I don't know if I even want another Hellboy, really ever. Am I bad to even say that? Like, I think this is a property that maybe just needs to go away.
I mean, it at least needs a long break. I think you're right in that. To me, I only really want to see Del Toro get to finish off his version, and now that I've kind of just had to come to peace with the fact that that's not going to happen. This just reiterated to me that it's a really hard property to do on screen. I think maybe, I was about to say maybe animated films would be better, but I've seen some of those like straight to DVD animated films they made, and those weren't any great shakes either. But yeah, I think it needs a break. I think it needs a cinematic break if you're not going to bring back the creative team and the star we want. Because yeah, this one is not calling for a sequel by any means.
Except in its two credit scenes. Did you see those?
Boy, not really like, I mean, I know I said we were wrapping it up, but okay, now you got me going on a path again. So really quickly, let me just point out, I was like ready to tear my hair out at the end of this film because it has what is a natural ending point, right? And then we get another tacked on stupid ass action scene that is meant to set up the sequel, and I hated that scene so much because it was clearly something like added in reshoots, right? It feels like so unnatural. It's like a different tone. It's like like the movie's like eighth tone now, you know, and it's like this the three characters now all buddy working together as full-fledged BRPD members. Hellboy and Ben Daimo are now just like best friends. And then it like teases Abe Sapien. But the thing that's so stupid is it acts like that tease is like so cool and like so like, oh, but it's like it's not, right? Because we've had Abe Sapien as a regular supporting character in the other films. That's not a character we've been away from forever, or going to be like, oh man, I can't wait to see what this creative team does with Abe Sapien, because I would just see that it's like, oh man, they're going to fuck that character up next time, huh? So like, not an exciting scene. And then, then we get the even stupider mid-credit scene with Lobster Johnson, another character pulled in from the comics. And boy, I forgot he was even supposed to be in this. And when he popped up, I was like, oh yeah, Thomas Hayden Church is Lobster Johnson. That's pretty interesting casting. And then he does not in the rest of the movie until this mid-credit scene. And then he has like 3 lines. And I was like, huh. That's an interesting usage of Thomas Hayden Church's time, you know, but yeah.
There was there was also a post-credit scene.
Oh boy, I did not get to the post-credit scene.
Oh yes.
How many goddamn scenes is? Just give me the rundown, Chris, because I'm not going to go back and watch it.
No, and it's pointless because I have no idea what it is. But it basically goes back to the Baba Yaga, and she's like in her little thing, and she's talking to somebody off screen about like, I was promised Hellboy's eye. And you got to work for me now, or whatever. You got to go get him. And this guy was, and then there's a voice that is cast, no voice that I know about. It doesn't ring a bell to me. And it's not, they never name the character, but the character's like, basically, yeah, like I'll do it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to figure out who that mysterious voice is.
It reminded me of the
that they clearly probably didn't know either, right? They're like, well, we'll just figure that out next time. You know?
Yeah, this was like the post-credit scene of Amazing Spider-Man. Remember that when it's in like in the jail scene or whatever, and it's just like an unnamed like just voice, and they're like, we don't even know who that was. Oh man. Anyway, so you didn't miss much.
Okay. One last question, Chris, before I get in my segment.
Sure.
Which movie has a better hero grabs Excalibur and it gives them magic powers scene? This one or King Arthur Legend of the Sword?
I actually think this one. I threw it in my notes that it was cool that he like pulls out the sword from the stone and it's in flames and he's like big and badass and it looks cool. I did like that. It was nice because it didn't have CGI Charlie Hunnam zooming around.
It's interesting because I've read the comic in like fits and starts over the years, and I'm not going to say I've read all of the comics, and I have not read enough to know if that's comic continuity, that he's actually Hellboy turns out in this film to be a descendant of King Arthur. And again, it's not even like that's super interesting, but it just like made me raise my eyebrows just because we had just done all this King Arthur stuff. And,
like I said, the Matrix is real, my dude.
And the fact that the movie, the movie proper, speaking of dumb ADR lines, ends with an ADR line where he's holding Excalibur and they walk up and they're like, "So you're King of England now, huh?" He's just like, "Yep." It's like, gotta go out on an ADR, and except you don't go out because then you have 18 more scenes. Okay, so that's Hellboy 2019. But as our listeners know, I like to spend a little bit of time on every edition of Milla Jovovich with the Milla Minute.
You fucking know what you want, and you're going after it. That takes a big set of iron balls.
My name is Alice.
Multipass.
I mean, it's like.
So the Milla Minute is me talking about another Milla project that I want to bring some attention to that I feel like maybe it's got lost in the shuffle or just not enough people have seen or discussed. And Chris, I don't know if you've seen this film. I don't know if we ever talked about this before, but the movie I wanted to briefly talk about today is a 2009 movie with Milla Jovovich called A Perfect Getaway. Is this one you're familiar with?
I can picture the poster.
Okay, you haven't seen it?
No.
Oh, buddy. Okay, you gotta add this to your list, and I'm very excited for you to talk to me about it afterwards.
Okay.
So, A Perfect Getaway is a 2009 film written and directed by David Twohy, who people will probably best know now for being the creator of the Riddick series. You know, he wrote and directed Pitch Black, and then went on to do the sequels. But he's also written some other. You know, he wrote he's one of the writers on Waterworld and The Fugitive and some other stuff. But
I'm looking at this cast right now, and I'm very excited.
Oh, dude, you're going to love this movie. I do think you're going to love this movie. So
Excellent.
What this movie is this is Milla Jovovich and Steve Zahn as a recently married couple going on vacation in Hawaii. And as they're in Hawaii, they encounter two different couples. One of the couples played by Chris Hemsworth and Marley Shelton, who people might remember from Grindhouse. And the other couple played by the amazing Timothy Olyphant, who we've talked about before, and Kylie Sanchez from Lost fame, I guess.
Is that what's her name? She gets buried, right? Is that her? Yeah. Okay.
What were their names?
Nikki and Paolo.
Nikki and Paolo. Yeah, she's Nikki. So her and Timothy Olyphant are the other couple they encounter while they're out on vacationing in Hawaii. And they all learn that there's recently been some murders that have happened very close by to where these couples are hiking. And Steve Zahn and Milla Jovovich, as through the progression of the film, they start to become very concerned that maybe Kylie Sanchez and Timothy Olyphant are the ones responsible for these murders. Or perhaps it's Chris Hemsworth and Marley Shelton, who are not in the movie as much, but whenever they're around, you get a very strange vibe from them. So this movie plays this like very interesting game where it's this kind of question of which of these couples are perhaps the murderers, or are any of them the murderers really? And I really don't want to say too much about this because this is a movie that really lives or dies on how effective the twists will be for you as you watch it.
Okay.
I'll just say this turns out to be a movie that's playing with the audience a little bit and playing with your expectations about genre and about filmmaking in particular. But yeah, great cast, all doing awesome work. I'm not the biggest Steve Zahn guy in the world, but I really quite like him and Milla in this. And of course, Timothy Olyphant is always great, and he's having a blast in this. Nobody should go see this for Chris Hemsworth. This is very early in his career. He's barely in it, really. He's just there in a few scenes, but makes an impact in those scenes, which, again, maybe I'm saying I shouldn't say anything more. I won't say anything more, but definitely check this one out. It's a really underrated film that I wish more people knew about, as is usually the case with these. But yeah, I'm excited for you to see it, Chris. I'm excited for anyone else listening to check it out.
Yeah, I am putting this on very near the top of my queue here because your other recommendation, Dummy, I can't find fucking anywhere. So
yeah, that's not surprising.
That unfortunately that might be a lost cause unless you mail me your DVD.
You might be able to find a used DVD of that for like $3 online, I would imagine. But
yeah,
who knows?
So I might have to dig a little deeper on that one. But A Perfect Getaway seems like I will be able to find that quite easily. So like it's even on Prime. It's on Prime, so I can watch it there. Excellent.
Yep.
So in saying that wraps up Hellboy 2019. Like I said earlier, if you want to follow along with us down to the finale of Milla June-vovich, it'll be The Fifth Element. So definitely like us on social media at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod. That's Twitter, Insta, Facebook, all that jazz. Rate, review, whatever you do. That would be sweet if you gave us a star rating. And especially join the tribe, hit that subscribe, and keep on with us, because this has been a lot of fun. I loved this discussion, by the way. I really, really, truly did. Usually I lie to your face about how I feel and that I say they're great, but this one, I really mean it.
Yeah. Boy, I'm really excited to see what we think of Fifth Element, man. That's a big question.
You know what? I have to say this. It might pose a challenge to the dread test.
It might.
Stay tuned.
One last thought here, Chris.
Sure.
You know, as we're heading out, I was mentioning earlier the embarrassment test and feeling embarrassed while you're watching a movie. I don't know if there's ever been a moment where I felt as embarrassed for everyone involved with the movie as the moment in Hellboy when Ian McShane's character is murdered and returns as a CGI ghost to give Hellboy some final advice. I don't know how to explain the CGI and how it looks in that moment and Ian McShane's little head floating on top of the CGI, other than I felt my soul leaving my body out of embarrassment for everyone involved with that sequence.
Yeah, it was like MS Paint projected so on something.
Hellboy 2019.
Thanks for listening.
I just looked down at my notes and I noticed Ian McShane ghost CGI. Like, oh yeah. That was so bad looking. I have to bring that up.
So bad.